Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. Felicity, why don't you lead us with a prayer today?
Let us pray. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us today from all parts of the corners of Michigan. We thank you for the blessing of sunshine, of good health. We thank you for the blessing of friendship. We pray for those who are suffering today with no homes or food, with lack of health care. And Lord, be with us as we discern through your words and learn from them and share what we've learned with others. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
And
Amen.
amen. Thank
Amen.
you so much. Very, it's a wonderful prayer. It's always good to put seminarians on the spot because it gets them used to real life as a priest. When all of a sudden they turn to you and say, "Oh, would you say a prayer?" So there you go. So let's see. What am I pulling up here? I've got, there we go. I've got everything I think I need. So let me share my screen here and we'll get it started. As you know, this is our Lenten Bible study when we are taking 7 weeks to look at the seven signs of Jesus. And why are we looking at seven signs? Because we're looking at the Gospel of John and John's seven signs revealing Jesus' glory. Is because that's how John chose to write his gospel. He didn't give us as much the chronology as he did by revealing Christ in the first half of his gospel through signs. And as we articulated last time, John's second half, even more than his second half, is dedicated to the last days of Jesus. And that's a whole other part. But as we polled each other at the beginning, we have favorite gospels, and this is my favorite. I really love the way John presents the information and piques our imagination with the images and words that are in use. So this is session 3, and we're in John chapter 5. So you can imagine if there's seven signs and we're in 5. And remember that the seventh sign is going to be Lazarus, right? And that's chapter 11. So we get them, and they're what, 21 chapters in John. So we get those signs at the beginning. And this is about healing the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda. And he didn't go to Maryland. It was actually a place there. So, as we know, the seven signs central to John's narrative are these seven significant miracles referred to by the author as signs, which are carefully curated and selected to reveal Jesus as Messiah, the Son of God. And as you remember, we had turning water into wine at Cana. And what do you guys remember from that might have been a reason that that particular story was chosen? Why do you think, what do you think it meant, and why do you think it was included? Jane, I'm going to ask you first.
Well, because marriage is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Jesus and his mother were present at this wedding, and that he chose to um, do a miracle there, the first one that's recorded in John, that just goes to show how important marriage is in God's scheme of things. And we recall also that in the Old Testament, um, the metaphor of marriage indicated God's relationship with his people.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you went there with the metaphor. I was going to bring that up if you didn't, because we really need to make sure and come back to this idea that John was not 100% literalist.
Mhm.
He was being very metaphorical. I mean, he was also very literal, right? He's the gate, he's the light, he's the bread, he's the way. Um, so anyway, so yeah, so that's a good understanding there. Then last week we did the healing of the royal official's son. And Felicity, what comes to mind for you in terms of what may be a message of that particular sign? Why do you think it was included?
It showed that God's power has no bounds.
Hmm.
There is no limit in distance, and there's just no limit. It's infinite.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, this was somebody who was a beloved child of somebody whose faith has made you well. Did we hear that in that particular pericope? We did, didn't
We
we?
did.
Mhm. I
Mhm.
think that's a message I'd like to bring up too, is the
Yeah.
importance of faith.
And
And
I think it also showed that Jesus didn't even have to be physically present
hmm
to affect the healing.
Now, in this particular miracle, the third one, which is the healing the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda, we'll get into that in great detail in just a few moments, and we'll see a number of themes pop up, and I'll be interested in asking about your opinion here. We certainly then have the feeding of the 5,000, which is the fourth sign, and that is actually depicted in one of our stained glass windows. So
Mhm.
next time you're in church, that is going to be your assignment, is find the window where Jesus feeds the 5,000 from John chapter 6. Because as you remember, he feeds the multitudes several times in the Gospels, not just once in every Gospel, which I always point out is the one miracle that is in all four Gospels, but he does it more than once in the four Gospels. So I think it's 5 or 6 times. So that's a big one. And then walking on water is our fifth sign. Healing the man born blind is our sixth sign. And our seventh is the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Today, of course, we're concerned with the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda. So, chapter 5, it's at the beginning. It's verses 1 through 15, and he presents this sign, this healing of a paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda. It's occurring on the Sabbath. Remember, it sparks
Mhm.
controversy. It reveals deeper truths about Jesus's authority, the nature of true healing, and of course the spiritual condition of humanity. So let's kind of delve into this passage if we can. First of all, I knew you would wonder, what does Bethesda mean, Father Chris? What does Bethesda mean? Well, it means, but it means, well, you know what Beth means, right? Or Bet. Anybody want to remember? Want to
A
throw that?
house?
It means house, right? So Bethlehem is the house of bread, and Bethesda is the house of fishing or the house of hunting. Okay, so that fishermen were from Bethesda because it was on the coast, it was on the sea. And so we have the pool. And this is the Sheep's Gate. It's going to mention the Sheep's Gate is near the pool. And when you go to Jerusalem, you can ask to see where was this pool. And you enter through the Sheep's Gate. Today they call it the Lion's Gate. It was renamed once the Muslims took over. And you can actually see some lions inscribed here. Here's a picture of them. And then this is our map of Jerusalem to remind you guys. Jerusalem is much bigger than this, but this is considered the old city here. And this little brown square up here is where the Sheep's Gate or the Lion's Gate is. So it's the east wall, and you'd just be going west to go into it. This green bit outside the wall is where the faithful Jews are buried. It's a cemetery right there. And then next to it is a well-known street. This would have been the street Jesus came in when he marched from Bethany on a donkey to come into Jerusalem, and he would have come in through the Sheep's Gate, or yeah, the Lion's Gate, the Sheep's Gate. It's also the gate where Saint Stephen, in the beginning of the chapter of Acts, was stoned. So you might call it Saint Stephen's Gate. Also, there's 7 gates to get into the old city. And that's this is the big one. So Bethesda is not too far from here. It goes into what now is called the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem. Remember, there are a number of quarters. There's the Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter, the Jewish quarter. So 4 quarters. And hopefully I will get a chance to go with all of you to the Holy City one day to see that in person, because it's really amazing. So Bethany then would have been out this way. And then if you go straight across this road, there's a hill, and on top of that hill is the Mount of Olives. And the Mount of Olives is like saying that, you know, that my pencil is a baseball bat. You know, I guess you could use it as a bat, but I really wouldn't call it, you know, and so these ideas when they call it a mount is you're like, what, that little hill? Yeah, that's the mount. So so you would climb on top of that. So right across the street here outside the gate, you get a lot of olive trees growing. And of course, Gethsemane is translated as olive press. So that's right outside this gate also. It's a beautiful walk, and then they've got a wonderful church there dedicated, because it was out there that Jesus taught them the Our Father, and it's dedicated to that wonderful event in Jesus's life. So this is about this is where we're talking in terms of where this is. So we are going to then jump over to, I'm going to come back to study questions, but first we got to read the text. So let me go ahead and share, and I have the New Revised Standard Version up on my screen, and you all can take a gander. I'm going to make it bigger. Don't worry, make it bigger. I know you guys always want it bigger. Okay, there you go. Make it get bigger, even bigger. How's that? Pretty good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm everybody's friend. That's good. That's what I want to be. Okay. Okay, perfect. So this is then chapter 5 that we're jumping into, and we've had a couple of things happen since then from our. Let's see if we can hit an arrow over here. Yeah, there we go. Let's see. In chapter 4, we had the woman at Samaria. Remember, we talked about her last time at the well that Jesus spoke with, and that's a big part of that. Chapter before we get to Jesus healing the official's son, which we talked about last time, remember? Okay. Yeah, because that was the second sign. And now on to the third sign, right after it, when Jesus heals on the Sabbath. Lorraine, I'm going to ask you to read. I want you to read verses 1 through 9. Can you do that?
Yes. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 particles. In this, oh my goodness, in these lay many ill, blind, lame, and paralyzed people. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The ill man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm making my way there, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk.
Wow. What sticks out to you all? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I didn't finish reading. Now that day was a Sabbath.
No, you're right. I want to stop there.
Okay.
What interests me is, a lot of people take this to mean when Jesus asked him if he wanted to be made well, that, maybe he didn't really want to be made well, but he couldn't get down to the pool by himself. And apparently he was alone and there was no one to help him.
What strikes you, Felicity?
Is there any significance to the 38 years?
Good question.
He'd been lying there a long time without ever figuring out a way to get there.
I mean, that's
So
like,
maybe in 38 years he could have edged closer to the pool.
Oh,
mhm.
to me, it means that people just ignored him after a while. He was there and he was just part of the environment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
To me, it symbolizes hopelessness,
Mm,
Yeah.
like
And
no hope whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
No chance of any kind of restoration. But then Jesus comes along and shows that there is no condition that's beyond God's power to restore,
Mhm,
because he was looking for restoration.
Mhm.
mhm.
And then that traditional belief that the pool was the place for healing, Jesus pulled a fast one and said, and showed or demonstrated that he had the power for true healing and um and not the superstition. So with faith, the man was healed. And of course, Jesus was, I say he was sassy again. He broke the law and did that on the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
That's the question. Is Does the angel come in and stir the water?
It's
Once a
very
year.
interesting. That's very interesting. I want you guys to read me verse 4.
There is no verse
There
4.
is no 4.
There is no 4, is there? No, it has to do with exactly what Merle said. And if you look at the footnote here, hover over it, it'll say, other ancient authorities add, wholly or in part, quote, waiting for the stirring of the water, for an angel of the Lord went down from time to time into the pool and stirred up the water, whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water was made well from whatever disease that person had. And you will notice that the NRSVU tries very hard to give you the straight dope. And what they've found after years of research is that that probably is not in the oldest manuscripts. Okay, which is interesting because, of course, you jump down then to verse to verse 7, and it says, "There's no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred." So it would seem that the stirring of the water might have been, there might be something to that. However, as I mentioned, they've been able to find through the study of ancient manuscripts that the oldest ones don't have that, and that the angel popped in at a time Christian history when there was more emphasis on the angels. So, in order to be true to the most original that we have, that is not in there. And so as a result, you guys are like, wait a minute, where's the 13th floor in this hotel? It goes from 12 to 14. What's the problem?
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Well,
same
then
thing
they
here.
should have left out verse 7 as well.
Well, that is not as, that you
But
could,
that leaves questions. What do they mean about stirring, and why do you have to get in first?
exactly,
know,
exactly, yeah.
They should have left it alone. What the heck?
Well, as I said, it was
I
a
mean,
later
everybody
add.
knows it the other way anyhow. Does this appear in other gospels or only here?
There are a couple of stories that are close to it. There's one in Acts, but it involves different kind of, the circumstances are different.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it is, let's see if I can look in my notes here and see where it is. Let's see.
I was just wondering if it was in some other gospel, maybe the
Well,
angel.
Acts 3, 1 to 10,
Okay.
is where we can find it. Let me turn there quickly and I'll give you a view because you did bring it up, Jane. There we go. Let's share the screen again. Okay. There we go. Okay. Now Peter and John went up together to the temple at the, I know, I gotta make it bigger. Okay. Go ahead, Jane, you read it since you brought it up.
Acts 3:1. Now Peter and John went up together to the temple at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour. And a certain man, lame from his mother's womb, was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, to ask alms from those who entered the temple, who, seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, asked for alms. And fixing his eyes on him with John, Peter said, "Look at us." Well, yeah, this is kind of totally different. So he gave them his attention, expecting to receive something from them. Then Peter said, "Silver and gold I do not have, but what I do have I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise and walk." And he took him by the right hand and lifted him up. And immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength. So he, leaping up, stood and walked and entered the temple with them, walking, leaping, and praising God. And all the people saw him walking and praising. Then they knew that it was he who sat begging alms at the beautiful gate of the. No, I mean, it's got nothing to do with the pool. No angel, no pool, no stirring, no nothing. And
But
this guy apparently had.
you asked if there was something similar.
No, well, no,
And
I
I
just
said,
wanted to
yes,
know.
there is.
Okay, so this version then doesn't appear in the other gospels. That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, what, yeah, no,
This guy had
it does not.
Okay.
What we have is, I mean, that's the closest that we have to it. Let's see. There is, though, now that you kind of brought it up, during that time, there was a cult called the cult of Asclepius. And the
Mhm.
cult of Asclepius was, kind of antagonistic towards Christianity. It was just different. But you will find that some of the Greek verbs that were used to declare healing or become healthy are used by John in his healing stories. And so that's also pretty interesting because there are other ordinary words that would be used in other places, but they've chosen to use the same as the Asclepius cult would have used. So there's kind of where your comparison, I think, is going to come. Um, if have I answered your question?
Um, well, I think it was just an idle wondering. Sorry to waste so much time on that.
I don't think you're wasting it. I think
Hygius, would that have been one of those Asclepian terms?
I'd have to look it up
Yeah,
and
well,
see.
I'm looking at it here in the Greek Bible.
Yeah,
It sounds like something that, like related to hygiene.
sure. Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the word that they use for healed,
Okay.
hygius.
Anyway, to come back down the path towards where we were. So after this, a festival, and so Jesus went to Jerusalem. So a festival means that Jesus wasn't the only one in Jerusalem.
Mhm.
It was packed with people. And then, as I mentioned, the Sheep Gate, or as it's called today, the Lion's Gate. Bethesda with its 5 porticos. And again, Felicity was looking at the numbers. What do these numbers mean? And in these, though, lay many ill, blind, lame, and paralyzed. So the idea was that they would just kind of like homeless folk that you would see gathering at camps, wanting to be made well. And you wonder after 38 years how beat up this guy's faith must have been, how hopeless he must have felt. And of all the people for Jesus to choose, why choose this one? Why choose this one who, it's plain that he's going to pick out a hopeless cause here. And what is that going to mean for us? So when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he was lying there a long time, it's the basic question. I think this is a theological question for us too, is do you want to be made well? Do you want to really see the change that you're praying for? Do you really want to see it? If you really did, why are you acting the way that you are? That's been a big Lenten question for me. Do you want to be made well? Because my one thing is I really do want to draw closer to God, and I want to understand Jesus more. And for me, because I was not raised, I went to my first protests a few weeks ago outside the Social Security office because I guess as one person who's soon going to be on Social Security, but then in a parish filled with people who are on Social Security, this really bothers me that people have been paying into this their whole lives, and it might in fact be curtailed. And so I wonder what Jesus would say and how Jesus would protest. It was pretty clear that he got killed not for just making fresh bread for people and and healing their sores, but he was killed because he was a political threat. And I wonder how in our efforts to live into Jesus's image. So that's been a growing edge for me. I'm not commending that for anybody else. That's my one thing. And I've said while we've been doing Lent that your one thing may be so personal that you're not telling anybody what it is. And that's fine because that means you're taking it personally. Because there is that one thing that you and only you may know that you need to start doing or stop doing. So my one thing is really wanting to change and be more like Christ. So I have to ask that question. Do you want to be made well? Do you really want to see the change in the world that you're hoping for? And if so, what are you doing about it? Because it's not just about, it seems that that's what Jesus is asking him. Do you really want to be made well? Because you seem to be 38 years. You seem to just come out here and just pull another page off the calendar every day.
And the interesting thing is he doesn't answer his question. He doesn't say, yes, I do, or no, I don't, or gee, I'm not sure.
He does. He kind of gives this excuse. He says, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah, he gives an
Right.
excuse. He doesn't really outright answer,
mhm.
you know? So that might indicate that maybe he doesn't really know. And
Well,
he doesn't even say that. He doesn't even say, I'm not sure. He
I
just
mean,
gives an excuse.
well, yeah, and I mean, how do you interpret that? Is that just an excuse?
Um, well, like I say, I would interpret it to say maybe he's not sure that he wants to be made well. You know, we used to talk about this a lot in the St. Luke meetings.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of people they get used to being invalid, sick.
Yep.
They get used to it. Sometimes they derive, well, maybe not so much this guy, but um, they get used to being pitied. They get certain satisfactions out of the condition. So changing that condition and becoming an effective person, that would be a major change. And that
Hampton,
would also entail responsibilities then.
oh, totally agree. Hampton, what about you?
And interesting. Listening to this discussion, I see a guy here who every time he tries to get in, somebody gets ahead of him, and he's sort of, and what Jane stated, is now used to that pity, and he's pitying himself. But what's more curious is someone has been dropping him off because he's paralyzed, been dropping him off, but never puts him in the water, at least when it's
Yeah.
stirred up.
Mhm.
And he's just sitting there. So when it's time for stirring up, he tries to get down there, but if someone jumps ahead of him every time, so he never gets healed. He's sort of like he's used to himself. He's complacent with that situation. And
Mhm.
I think he wants to get well, but he's sort of resigned himself to this self-pity.
Yeah, resignation. You know,
Right.
it's like he can't
Yeah,
imagine a change in his condition. He can't
right.
imagine what it would be like to be well.
Yes.
Yet he has faith.
Yes, he does.
And he keeps going there. Yeah.
His body fails him, but he's got faith.
Yes.
So,
I think Jesus sees that he has faith and is finally speaking to him, says, you know, I it doesn't surprise me that Jesus had probably seen him before, but finally we get to a point where you know, I think sees a desperation in the gentleman, uh, on the parapletic. So it's different viewpoints. I don't know. It's
okay.
interesting.
Hampton, this, of course, was just written for these people in this day, right? There's nothing we can apply to our lives today, right? This isn't here to help us. We just look at it in history. Um, and I think I'm being facetious here.
Right,
This
right.
was written for us, and it
Yes,
was written for all of us who have given up hope over being the person we think God's called us to be, to seeing the world and doing in the world what we think God's wanting to do. So it's easy for me to say, oh, well, yeah, I'm perfectly healthy. I would certainly have jumped in. I would have bribed people to get me there. Well, the problem is, of course, that we are all sitting on stuff that we say we want to do and we have the faith to do. But for whatever reason, apathy, complacency, the way things have always been, have been that's a heavy burden he's bearing, right?
yeah,
It's for 38 years. And so I think that this passage is meant for you and I to rekindle hope and to say, if this guy after 38 years can, can do this, because I don't think that, I mean, I think we all have faith. I think we all want to get better, whatever that means to you. And this is, of course, a very personal healing for this guy. But I think all of us have, and maybe we haven't thought about it, or haven't thought about it in a long time, but have a vision for the world that's better than it is, where poor people are not being discarded on the streets in many countries, some here, where the elderly are not, staying up all night because they don't know how to pay the bills. Just name the social ill that Jesus came to heal. Because make no bones about it, Jesus was here to literally feed people, to literally heal people, to literally cast out demons, but also metaphorically to do that so that we could take a hold of this. And so what does it mean for us to answer that question? Yeah, I do want to be made well. And not with an excuse, but to say, yeah, I really do want to see this change in the world. And is it, and how is this, personal question play out in our lives? So I think it's a really, really important question. Um, and I like the fact that you pointed out that, obviously this guy had somebody take him there because, how do you get there? And then, of
Yeah.
course, Jesus is saying, stand up on the Sabbath, take your mat and walk. And once the man was made well and took up his mat and began to walk. So let's call on Robin. Robin, do you want to read the next bit here?
How far?
All the way, finish it up,
Okay.
verse 15, 18.
All right. Now that day was a
Or
Sabbath.
I'm sorry, it just goes to 15, so don't read this bit, okay?
Okay. Now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is a Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have made me well. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well.
All right, folks, what are your observations?
Well, that was a setup.
Do you think that this man knew that by revealing Jesus' identity, was going to bring persecution down on him? Did he know that, or was he simply naively answering the question that they had put to him?
What do you all think?
Well, they told him it was a Sabbath and it wasn't lawful. So, it's not like he wasn't informed.
So if he wanted to keep Jesus out of trouble, he would have just kept his mouth shut.
Mm.
That would have been an option.
Does that betray ingratitude?
But he's committed a crime as far as they're concerned by getting up and carrying his mat. So if he
Oh,
doesn't mention,
he's passing the buck?
yeah,
I think
Uh,
Jesus would have done it regardless
well,
because
well, of
he
course,
he
yeah,
wanted
Jesus,
to
yeah.
confront the religious authorities anyway.
yeah.
Yeah, but this man, I'm just wondering, um, if he was if he was very grateful to Jesus, he might have just left and not said anything. Or
Mhm.
did he know that people were going to start persecuting Jesus then, if he revealed his identity?
Well, something profound just happened to him.
Yeah.
So imagine if something profound happened to you, wouldn't you want to share the news?
Yeah, but I would have wanted to share it with somebody who wasn't going to turn around and persecute the person who helped me. I would have gone and told my family and friends.
So, John, as you know, was well known for pointing out the hypocrisy of the religio-economic system of his time. And so he is a rabbi, and so he is going to get down on the rabbis. Okay, I think it's important for us to remember.
Mhm.
Next time you're mad at somebody who's religious, let the
Mhm.
Baptists get on the Baptist case, right? Let the Catholics get on the Catholic's case. Let's just you get on the Episcopalian's case, okay? So Jesus was infuriating the established religion. And I hate the fact that it's translated Jews because we have Jews today. Because people will sometimes then equate that with the Jews who lived down the block. That's not who Jesus is talking to. Jesus is talking to the corrupt religious establishment. And he uses that phrase, the Jews, a million times. And it's very often in cases like this where there's just robust hypocrisy. Can you imagine somebody laying for 38 years, he's finally cured, and you're like, but you're carrying your mat. I mean, what are you thinking? I mean, come on. Here's a guy and so this is clearly something John's trying to say about the established religious order. And folks, let me give you some news that you already know. whenever you build these institutions want to protect themselves. I don't care if
Yeah.
it's a college, I don't care if it's Catholics, Episcopalians. I mean, I've seen it happen in our own church with bishops turning the other way because it was a fellow bishop. And, it's going to happen at General Motors, it's going to happen at whatever the institution. So that's just endemic when we put the institution above the person, and it's sinful, right? And this is what Jesus is pointing out. You guys, I mean, of all things to get, I mean, it's just a stupid mat, I mean, it's not like he's out there planting seeds or doing some work, right? He's just carrying his mat. So this is one of the big things I think we need to point out is Jesus is really paving the way for the hypocritical establishment that needs to come down. And of course, we will hear about, going through the temple and raging, and we will hear some terrible caustic words from Jesus, you brood of vipers, all kinds of stuff, because this religiosity really, really, really does upset him. Why? Because what's the hope for the world? The religion. And what are you doing? Well, I'm choosing to be a hypocrite, and I'm going to use the religion for my own personal good, which of course is what Christian nationalism is, right? And that's why a lot of Christians are vehement about that, is they're using it for their own personal worldly good, right? So the Jews, they want to know who he is. The guy doesn't know who he is. And somehow he disappeared in the crowd. So verse 14, later, Jesus found him in the temple. So Jesus is hanging out in the temple. See, you've been made well. Now do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you. How are you guys interpreting that?
Yeah, that's a curious one. I
Mhm.
wonder what he was doing that made him say that. What could he have been doing? Could he have joined the money changers? Or what could he have done?
It almost implies that his illness was because he had done something wrong.
Mm,
And that's what the culture at that time believed. And we still believe
Yeah.
that today.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think they touch on that in James as well. The connection, a lot of times when we do things that are wrong or missing the mark or sinful, that can produce illness.
yes.
How did
So
you?
on a psychological level, there's a connection very often. I mean, even if we don't want to say that it's a punishment, that we get sick because it's a punishment from God, but on a psychological level, there is a connection. There's the body-mind connection.
I don't think we
just
can say that because the Pope is ill, and
No, 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 no,
well,
no, no, no. He
well,
he had this ongoing lung thing since he was young. He
yeah,
had a
since he was
yeah,
born,
yeah,
he was born that way. So
yeah,
who sinned? His parents?
maybe. Oh, undoubtedly.
So thank you, Felicity, for bringing up this idea of retributional theology. That's thought a lot of primitive religions. That's the origin of sacrifices, animal sacrifices, baby sacrifices. Is
Mhm.
that we want to appease the God, because if we do good by showing God how much we worship God, then then our crops won't fail, our wives will have a lot of babies, and whatever prosperity looks like for us. But what I think is important here is, how did you break your leg? Oh, well, I was stealing somebody's TV and I tripped over a fence. Okay.
Mhm.
There's this sense that, why are you in jail? Well, I was drunk driving. Okay. So go forth and sin no more may very well have meant to that man, what got you there.
Yeah.
How you got that is you didn't, and I'm telling you, there are, for most of the Jewish laws, there's a practical aspect to it. Why do you think you're not going to eat pork when you live in a desert and you have no refrigeration? Because you don't want to get strychnine, right? I mean,
Right.
these are very practical. Why do you have to wait 7 days until you circumcise the baby? Because in that primitive society, a baby could not take that operation with the kind of implements and stuff that they had back then until after 7 days, right? So why did God kill my baby? God didn't kill your baby. God told you to wait 7 days. You waited the first day, right? So your sin is what has caused this. May very well have that causal effect to it, right? And that's not to take away from Felicity's comment of a people who really why were you captive? Why did the Babylonians take you for captivity? And of course, the prophets are saying, because you forgot to keep the sacrifices, you forgot to do all the commandments that to follow them closely enough. Um,
Well,
and that makes it look like God is just some kind of a petty, referee looking to catch you doing what's wrong. When in fact, I bet a lot of it is in fact causal. That had they been acting that way, stay true to your wife and whatever, and you're going to not get a lot of diseases that were being passed around there. So anyway, you were gonna say something, Jake?
well, yeah, there are still, I mean, whenever there's a natural disaster, some minister from somewhere will come out and say, well, that's because the United States allows gay marriage, or something.
Absolutely. Pat Robertson said that, didn't he?
Yeah.
That's true.
Famously, yep.
Yeah.
This is why it's come upon you. And it's interesting because when you say that, you do get a lot of headlines. But I wouldn't really like those headlines. But, he seems to. Anyway, I think that as we look at that, we have to consider those things in terms of Jesus telling to sin no more, because it may have been some sort of thing that he had done violating the law, that gave him that disease. And he knew it, and perhaps Jesus knew it when he said, look, go on and do the thing that you're supposed to do, and you won't get sick anymore. So obeying the commands is a big, big theme throughout the Hebrew Bible, is being true and honest and upright and obedient to the commands of God. So as we as we move through these, I've got some application questions for you that I want you to ponder. And I've got them written down here because I do like us to be able to leave here with a little bit of a food for thought here so that we can make the changes in ourselves we want to make. Reflect on your own paralysis, areas in your life where you feel helpless or stuck. And I think that's important for us to ask. Where do I feel just so helpless? I've tried to change this thing. I've tried to start that thing. How are we paralyzed and stuck on the mat? How are we as a nation paralyzed? I think it's very clear that we are paralyzed by fear. We fear that if we are, you look at some of these countries in Scandinavia and elsewhere, and they, kind of have like very few, if any, homeless people. They have places where they take the elderly. They have families that are allowed to bond a lot better because they give both parents like 6 months or a year off when they have a baby. And those kinds of things. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of free market democracy, but I do wonder how we have lost this moral script. Where is the paralysis about taking care of, they say now it's well over half of Americans are paycheck to paycheck. We just are really having a hard time coming up with a way to do the economy that's going to keep.
The idolatry, idolatry of wealth,
greed,
Yes.
greed,
Yes.
the absolute idolatry of wealth. And plus there's a certain selfishness when people think that, okay, if I pay a little more in taxes to help other people, that's like, it's as if they feel they're afraid it's taking something away from them when they don't realize that by paying a little more taxes, they get free education, healthcare, and a whole bunch of other stuff that's potentially bankrupting us. I mean, it's short-sightedness.
Well, there's certainly, I mean, I'm no economist, I'm no politician, but we do need to ask, how are we being paralyzed as a nation? How are other nations? Because I don't think we have to, I think Teddy Roosevelt was right. We shouldn't measure the greatness of a nation by how much the richest among us have. We should measure the greatness of our nation by how much the poorest have.
Exactly.
And
it's the
around
oligarchy.
here, it ain't much. So that's an issue. So paralysis in your own life. Where do you feel helpless? Where do you feel stuck? Where do you look up at? I mean, I look I mean, we've got that food pantry down the hall here, and I'm like, how is this gonna end? You know, how are we gonna, we're just a tiny little church, you know, what are we gonna do about this? Um, and so it's easy to just lay on the couch and hide behind a keyboard and yell at other people. But what are we doing, you know, to make it move forward? So consider Jesus' question, do you want to get well? I think we talked about that. Are you truly willing to receive healing from him? And again, that's very poignant when we take it out of that context and put it in our own, which does not invalidate the question. But the third is examine your priorities. Are you focused on external rules or on a genuine relationship with Jesus? Did I say my prayers? Did I go to church enough? Did I read my Bible enough? Whatever these rules are, do we get too focused on them? And at the behest of that genuine relationship. I love the way that Jesus modeled a genuine relationship with God for us, and that is by his priority, absolute priority, in spending significant amounts of time with God, in Scripture, fellowshipping with those who are on the same journey, and of course, waking up every day saying, how can I fix it? How can I fix it? And I think that those four things are still our call. And when it comes to setting our priorities, how can we move beyond the checklist, right? And I had times in my life when I did that more when I was younger. I'm just so glad to be getting older because a lot comes into perspective as you get older. You know, they say that the happiness that you experience in life is a bell curve. That you know, I will watch my little 6-year-old run around. He is so happy, man. He skips. Don't you love to see kids skip? I mean, it's kind of like when a cat wags its tail. It's a sign that they're happy. And so he's skipping, but look out, because that bell curve is going to rise, and you can see the nervous and this anxiety in my high schoolers, right? And then, of course, you go up, you're 20, 30, 40, 50, you got kids, you got a job, you got so-and-so, and then you kind of cross in your 50s, you get into your 60s and your 70s, and you just get just as happy as Jack, you know? You experience it perhaps even a little bit more, because you finally decided, you know what, I guess I'm not going to be the quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, and that's okay. You know, you make peace with your own skin and you say, that's okay. I didn't want that anyway, right? The fox and the grapes. But this idea of being able to genuinely focus on our authentic relationship with Jesus and what does that look like? And I think that, you know, I don't know how big a question that is for Episcopalians compared to maybe some other religions that have much more of a, you know, Bible study every Wednesday night, read through the Bible like this, follow this study plan, here's your way, your surefire way to maturity. When it's just much more ethereal than that, you know, it comes from a relationship, and there's no checklist that you can have to being the most in love with a human, and there's no checklist you can have to be most in love with God, right?
And you know, when you were speaking about what Jesus did to foster his relationship, he spent a lot of time in prayer.
Mhm.
Yeah, sometimes all night. I mean, he
Yeah, he
really
would go
devoted.
away from the people, go up, you know, into the mountain or whatever, and just pray.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so then reflect on the warning regarding sin. Are there areas in your life where you need to turn from sin and seek spiritual healing? Um,
Mhm.
you know, even they say that when you harbor unforgiveness, that can actually have some physical health benefits in
Oh,
terms of
yeah.
stress and this sort of thing.
Mhm.
And that I think is sinful to harbor unforgiveness. And I know it's hard. I struggle with that with some people in my life who've proven to be very difficult to forgive. Um, and there are other things I think that we can struggle with, and that struggle in itself is going to take a toll. You
Yeah,
know, it's the famous book title, "The Body Keeps the Score," right?
right.
Mhm.
It
Your
was a good
body's
book.
gonna know. So reflecting on the warning regarding sin, are there areas in your life where you need to turn from sin and to
Mhm.
seek spiritual healing? Um,
You know, the important thing about unforgiveness is to acknowledge that we don't have to think that the people who did us wrong, that they were right. We just have to ask God to give us the grace to forgive them, you know.
That's exactly right.
Just separating that, what they've done from what we need to do to be well in ourselves.
Yeah, there's a wonderful course in our online school, in our Church Next school, on forgiveness that
Mhm.
kind of takes you through the steps, really, makes some very good points regarding forgiveness. The things that are done against you will affect you according to the seriousness, the serious nature of it. Somebody
Mhm.
steals a quarter from you versus somebody who, burns down your house, you're going to have the different levels, and it's going to each one has its own level of difficulty, but
Mhm.
that, you know, naming it, and I think they're even like the 5 or 6. There's a mnemonic that goes with it, of I think a 5 letter word where you can kind of memorize it, and where you can walk through what it is that's bothering you. But unforgiveness, unfortunately, is rife because people are taking revenge. We've found in Detroit that the single most successful deterrent of street crime, these shootings that you hear of in gangs and retaliatory shootings, which make up a whole lot of deaths in Detroit. The most helpful initiative they've had is something called CVI, Community Violence Intervention. And what they simply do is when there's a shooting and it's regarding the Hatfields and McCoys, right, on a certain block, what they do is they send people who've been in prison for shooting people, for killing people. They wait till they're out of prison, and then they enlist them, and they say, okay, here's the guy who got shot. He's over at Cyanide room 310. Go talk to him. And those murderers go out and they say, look, dude, I know what you're thinking right now. You're plotting your revenge. You're going to go out, you're thinking, how am I going to get the gun? When am I going to go over there? And when am I going to get that guy for doing to me what he did to you? Right? And they have been so successful in talking people out of doing that by basically saying, look, you'll go and do that and you'll shoot him, and you're going to end up in prison sharing your oatmeal with either him or his buddies. So you better make peace now, because you have to make peace in prison anyway. And I mean, they just talk them out of doing that by by negotiating like that, and because unforgiveness will kill you, and unforgiveness will get you shooting somebody who shot you, and where's that going to take you, right? You want to live your life in prison? So that's why this, I think, is so important, and this is a wonderful, I think, theme for us to end on as we reflect on that warning regarding areas of our life that we need to turn to God and turn over to God, which may be unforgiveness. So was this helpful today, you guys?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good.
I have a question.
Yep.
I think it was Charles Stanley or various people say, no, it was somebody, anyhow, that if you really, really have a very hard time forgiving somebody, just ask God to forgive them through you, ask for God's grace.
Sure. Whatever you need to make it happen.
Yeah.
So good. Well, listen, you guys, I look forward to seeing you next time. We will have the feeding of the 5,000, the fourth sign next time. So you can go practice by eating bread and fish, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.